Welcome back to Greek, everybody. We're now at chapter 20. I know it's difficult. Just keep pushing because in the end, you'll be reading Greek right out of the Bible. It's exciting. It'll be worth it. You'll be proud of yourself. In this chapter, we look at verbal roots and the liquid future. Here we'll encounter the key terms root, stem, liquid future, and compound verb. I need to say something at the outset, and that's that this chapter is usually one of the most ignored, but at the same time, one of the most helpful chapters if you want to understand the formation of Greek verbs. Let me repeat that because often people don't believe it. This chapter is at the same time one of the most ignored, but also the most helpful chapters in the textbook if you want to understand the formation of Greek verbs. Don't let this information just slip in and slip back out. Pay close attention to what we're going to do here. In our discussion, we're going to lay this out a little differently than Mounts does in his textbook. I'd like to focus on two main concepts in the chapter. The concept of what's called liquid future verbs and the principle that stems and roots differ from each other. We'll also briefly discuss compound verbs. So again, this will be slightly different than the way Mounts lays things out, but I think it hits the main point. Let's talk about the liquid future. A verb has a liquid future when it has a stem ending either in a liquid consonant or a nasal consonant. Linguists categorized letters by their point of articulation and their manner of articulation. A liquid consonant is one that's articulated when the air flows around the tongue, so lambda or rho in that manner. A nasal consonant is pronounced by the air vibrating through the nose, so hence mu and nu. So any verb with the stem ending in any of these four consonants will have a liquid future. So a liquid future, just like the regular future, is formed from the second principal part. So we have here, we're going to use minnow as our paradigm word because you see it has, of course, a nasal at the end of the stem. So minnow in the present, minnow in the future. So very similar, of course, but with a small difference. And you'll see why in just a second. Okay, so the formation of the liquid future active. As we said, we use the second principal part, stem men. Tense formative is now no longer sigma, as it is for the regular future, but epsilon sigma, followed by a connecting vowel, which is based on the normal rules. Now, if you look at the tense formative followed by connecting vowel, you may, if you're very astute here, be able to figure out what's going to happen, which we'll look at it in a second. And then we use our primary active personal endings, primary because we're in a primary tense, a non-past tense. Formation of the liquid future middle. Same, stem from the second principal part, tense formative epsilon sigma, connecting vowel, but now we use our primary middle passive personal endings. So let's look at the paradigms. First, the liquid future active indicative of minnow. I've got in parentheses what the forms would look like if they stayed as expected. So you have men stem, epsilon sigma tense formative, followed by your connecting vowel plus personal ending. So what's happened here? Well, it looks like, again, we have what's called an intervocalic sigma. Were you able to figure that out? After which contraction will occur, so we get circumflexes over the endings indicating that there's been contraction. So the endings are meno, menes, mene, menumen, meneta, menusin. So again, that sigma has been destroyed in the battle between two vowels. The liquid future middle indicative of minnow. The same story. You've simply lost your intervocalic sigma, and then contraction has occurred, which has given you these circumflexes. So menumai, mene, menetai, menumatha, menesthe, menuntai. And where, again, have we seen the biggest change? In the second person singular. What has happened? Those two vowels surrounding the sigma become so obsessed with it. They smother it to death unwittingly, and then we get this strange contraction. Now again, if you look closely at this, if you're very astute, you'll notice an uncanny similarity to some other conjugations we've seen. Compare now the liquid future active indicative of meno with the present active indicative of poieo, a contract verb. Meno, menes, mene, menumen, menete, menusin. And for the present of poieo, poieo, poies, poiei, poiumen, poiete, poiusin. What? Why? Why are they exactly the same but different tenses? Well, we've talked about why it is, based on the contraction rules. What we want to know is how you can tell the difference. And the answer is learning your vocabulary, knowing your lexical forms. If you know the lexical form meno, you recognize that it has a stem ending in a nasal, which would categorize it as a liquid future, which would give you the forms that we see here. O, ace, a, umen, et, usin. Where the present of poieo, you would recognize by knowing the lexical form poieo, and knowing that it's poieo, you would know that it's a contract verb of the epsilon class, which would give you just these forms. So the answer is knowing lexical forms. Another frustrating similarity, the liquid future active indicative of meno, which we've been looking at, but now compare the liquid present active indicative of meno. Identical? Almost. What's the difference? Only the accent. You'll get the circumflex accents in the liquid future because contraction has occurred after the loss of your intervocalic sigma, whereas no contraction occurs in the liquid present, and therefore you get the acute accents. So accent, once again, does make a difference sometimes. The second concept in this chapter, which is the one I was referring to when I said one of the most ignored, but at the same time one of the most helpful concepts that will be introduced in the textbook if you want to understand the formation of Greek verbs, that's this right here. Pay close attention. A so-called root is the most basic form representing a concept in the language. So take agapa, for example. This is a root, and that root can stand behind a verb, like agapao, a noun, like agape, or an adjective, like agapetas. The same root can stand behind multiple words representing multiple parts of speech in a language. So far, you've encountered verbal roots ag, baptid, gen, graph. Let's contrast that with the concept of the stem. A stem is the most basic form of a verb in a particular tense. So this is a much more restricted concept. The most basic form of a verb in a particular tense. So look at luo, the paradigm word we've been using most so far. The stem is actually the same in all 6 principal parts. Now that just happens to be the case for this particular type of verb. It's not always true that the stem will be the same in every tense. Now the stem of a verb in a particular tense is not always identical with the root behind the verb. Sometimes the root is not modified in the present tense. When the root is not modified in the present tense, the root and the stem are identical. And that's what we saw with luo. And that's why you have the same stem all the way across in all principal parts, in other words, in all tenses. Sometimes the present tense will use a different root from the root of other tenses. And we've seen this with 3 verbs so far. Erkamai in the future uses eusamai, lego in the future uses ero, and horao in the future uses opsamai. So you see there, we're actually using different roots. And the reason for that is because these were actually different verbs originally, which have teamed up, so to speak, to fill in the gaps in their principal parts. In many cases, though, the root behind a concept and behind a verb will be modified, but will be modified only in the present tense. So it will be the present tense stem that actually looks irregular compared to the other principles. Let's look then at verbs where the present tense stem modifies the root. Verbs with a stem ending in a dental consonant will often add consonantal iota in the present tense stem, and only in the present tense stem. And oddly enough, that combination will give you a zeta. So you have a veritable transformation of the verb because of the combination. So if you look here, baptizo is the result in the first principal part of a dental plus a consonantal iota. That's where you get the zeta, baptizo. Whereas in the future tense, if you have baptid as your root, you add your tense formative sigma, and by rule, a dental followed by a sigma drops out, hence baptizo in the future. A velar plus a consonantal iota, strangely enough, gives you the combination double sigma. So here with hupatasso, the root is actually hupatag. With a velar at the ending, add a consonantal iota and you get the double sigma. Whereas in the future, hupatag plus a future tense formative sigma will give you hupataxo. So a helpful habit here would be to actually memorize the root of verbs as you learn the lexical forms and English meanings. Mounts lists the verbal root in parentheses next to the verb in your vocab lists. So you might want to write those roots and memorize the roots as well. Another strange combination, a lambda stem plus a consonantal iota gives you a double lambda, as we see with balo as a result of this combination. Whereas in the future, now we have a stem ending in a liquid, so that's a liquid future. Hence it uses the epsilon sigma, tense formative. And then once you get contraction, you get balo with the circumflex, but only one lambda. In other cases, you'll add a consonantal iota and then you'll have metathesis. Metathesis simply means that two letters change places. So REO will become IRO. Other verbs will add isk to the root in the present only. So apathon plus isk plus o is apathnesco. Gno plus isk plus o is gnosko. And again, those changes occur to the root only in the present tense stem, not in the other tenses. And then sometimes your stem vowel will undergo a blout. A blout simply means that your vowel grade has changed, either short to long or long to short, or the vowel has dropped out. So here you could explain apathnesco with apathon as having dropped the alpha, hence a version of a blout. But you could also explain it as a form of metathesis with the alpha and the nu changing places and then the alpha lengthening to eta. Okay, so to summarize, the difference between stems and roots. First, there is a difference. A root is the most basic form representing a concept, and that root can stand behind a verb, or also a noun, or an adjective, or an adverb. A stem is a more restricted idea. A stem is the most basic form of a verb in a particular tense. And what we've discussed here is how the present tense stem has often added something to the verbal root, and that has created a difference in appearance in the present tense stem than in the other tenses. So really, it's the present tense stem that appears irregular very often. Okay, briefly, I want to introduce a third concept, and that's the concept of compound verbs. This is pretty simple. A compound verb is simply a simple form of a verb with a prepositional prefix added. So the simple verb balo, which in the future is balo. In the compound form, you'll have ek on the beginning. So ek meaning out of, balo meaning to throw. So ek balo would be I throw out. And in the future, add ek. So ek balo, I will throw out. That's pretty much all there is to it. You'll change the endings in the same way that you would with the simple form. You just have a prefix added to the beginning. Okay, so here's our master verb chart, which we continue to add to. So we have here the liquid future middle and the liquid future active. Very helpful chart that's been put together here that shows you how to construct a verb, which verbs take an augment, which tense stem you use, that is which principal part it comes from, your tense formatives, which set of personal endings to use, very nice summary of how to form the verb. So please continue to work through the master verb chart. That will help you, I believe, immensely as you try to keep these all straight. Over your vocabulary, repeat after me. Iro, apoctano, apostello, baptizo, gnosko, glossa, agero, ekbalo, eke, kreno, laos, meno, horao, Sophia, Stama, and Sozo. All right, now what you want to be able to do here is to explain the difference in the tense stem between the present and the future. So I've listed the future as well. And this has to do, of course, with the difference between a root and a stem. So it's often the future that preserves the root and the present that has added something to it. So the root here, R, the present has added the iota to give you iro. Here, it's the future that preserves the root, apocten, and the present has added a consonant iota. Here, apostel with one lambda. What has the present added? Not really a lambda. What has it added? A consonant iota, and a lambda plus the consonant iota gives you a double lambda. Here, neither one really preserves the root intact. The root is, of course, baptid, ending in a dental, and the dental plus the consonant iota gives you a zeta, and the dental followed by a sigma tense formative here, the dental will drop out, and so on. So it would be a good idea, a good exercise for you to run through the principal parts and see if you can explain how you get from the present to the future, or vice versa, or rather how you get from the root to the present. So congratulations, you're at nearly 75% of the words in the New Testament.